The silence stretched for 17 heartbeats before chaos erupted throughout the Galactic Council chamber. Emergency protocols activated as ancient security systems dormant for millions of years suddenly blazed to life. Warning lights that no living, being remembered installing began flashing in patterns that spoke to genetic memories buried so deep they had been forgotten by entire civilizations. War Chief Brutus of the Conquest Federation was the first to recover, his obsidian exoskeleton shifting from amusement displays to full combat readiness. "Impossible," he rumbled, his mandibles clicking in rapid-fire patterns that his species used when confronting existential threats. Terra is a myth, a legend from the time before. No species could have survived the Great Burning. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the center of the chamber, confusion evident on her features as beings that had been mocking her moments before now stared with expressions ranging from terror to worship. The Ancient One's presence seemed to expand, filling the vast space with something that made even the most arrogant species feel small. "Tell them," the Ancient One commanded, and its voice carried weight that seemed to bend space itself. "Tell them about your son." Sarah's brow furrowed. "Our son? It's a G-type main sequence star, approximately 4.6 billion years old. We call it Sol. It provides the energy that sustains life on our world." Another wave of recognition swept through the chamber. Counselor Nexus of the Machine Intelligence Network began processing data at rates that caused its quantum cores to glow with dangerous heat levels. "Sol, Terra." Computational match found in pre-civilization archives. Warning: data classification level exceeds current security clearance. Warning: historical analysis may cause existential crisis protocols to activate. Zexhai felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 centuries of political maneuvering: genuine fear. His species' oral traditions, passed down through genetic memory engrams, contained fragments of stories about the First War. Most scholars dismissed them as mythological explanations for the galaxy's periodic dark ages. But those stories spoke of a star system called Solterra, the birthplace of something so terrible that entire civilizations had united to destroy it. "Ancient One." Zexhai's voice carried a tremor he couldn't suppress. "Surely you don't mean to suggest that these primitives are descended from the Terrans of legend?" The being that had observed the galaxy's cycles for eons turned its attention to the Dominion ambassador. When it spoke, reality seemed to crystallize around its words. "I do not suggest. I remember." A holographic display materialized in the chamber's center, showing star charts that predated current galactic cartography by millions of years. Ancient navigation routes, trade networks, and territorial boundaries flickered into existence, painting a picture of a galaxy radically different from the current political landscape. 65 million years ago, the Ancient One began, the galaxy knew a golden age of expansion and discovery. Hundreds of species had achieved faster-than-light travel. Trade flowed freely between star systems. Knowledge was shared across the cosmic community. And at the center of it all was Solterra, the first world to develop what you now call civilization. Sarah's eyes widened as the implications hit her. "You're saying Earth, Terra, was part of an ancient galactic civilization?" "Not just part of it," the Ancient One corrected. "Terra was its foundation. Your species, in its earliest form, gave the galaxy its first taste of what cooperative civilization could achieve. They shared technology freely, mediated disputes between species, and sought always to build rather than destroy." The hologram shifted, showing the Sol system as it had existed eons ago. Multiple worlds teemed with life. Vast space stations orbited the planets like artificial moons, and ships moved in streams between the worlds like schools of metal fish. War Chief Brutus couldn't contain himself. If these Terrans were so powerful, so advanced, what happened to them? Why does the galaxy show no trace of their empire? The Ancient One's presence seemed to darken, and the chamber's temperature dropped perceptibly. Because the other species grew jealous, fearful. The Terrans' philosophy of cooperation and mutual aid was spreading, threatening the established order of conquest and domination. Warrior cultures saw their martial traditions becoming obsolete. Slave-holding empires watched their forced labor systems crumble as the Terran model of voluntary cooperation proved more efficient. Images flashed across the hologram, massive fleets gathering in the void, species that had been bitter enemies finding common cause, weapons being forged specifically for one purpose, the alliance of supremacy formed for one goal. the Ancient One continued. The complete eradication of Terra and everything it represented. They called it the Great Burning. 12 species, led by the ancestors of the Dominion, the Conquest Federation, and the Mechanicus Collective, united to destroy not just Terra, but the very idea that strength could be found in anything other than domination. Zexhi's genetic memory engrams were firing now, pulling up ancestral knowledge he had never wanted to access. The glory of the Great Burning, when his people had led the galaxy in purging the weakness of cooperation. The songs of triumph when the Sol system burned. The celebration when Terra itself was cracked like an egg and left to drift as asteroid debris. But they failed, Sarah said quietly, understanding beginning to dawn on her face. Some of us survived. A few, the Ancient One confirmed. Those who were off-world when the bombardment began. They scattered to the edges of the galaxy, found primitive worlds where they could hide and slowly rebuild. Over millions of years, the survivors interbred with local species, their advanced genetics dormant but never truly lost. They waited, evolved, and eventually forgot their true heritage. The hologram zoomed in on a small blue-green world orbiting a young yellow star. Terra was gone, but its children endured. They grew on new worlds, developed new civilizations, and eventually one group found its way back to the Sol system. Found a young planet in the habitable zone and made it their new home. They called it Earth, but deep in their genetic code they remembered its true name. Counselor Vorth of the Crystal Hegemony was vibrating at frequencies that indicated extreme distress. This is impossible. If humanity carries Terran genetics, they should be more advanced. The Ancient One's voice carried dark amusement. Consider this. They developed faster than light travel in mere centuries rather than millennia. They resisted the urge to use their most powerful weapons for conquest. They seek cooperation over domination, despite having the genetic potential for incredible violence. They've achieved in a few thousand years what most species require hundreds of thousands of years to accomplish. Sarah looked around the chamber with new eyes, seeing the terror in the faces of beings who had been dismissing her species as primitives moments before. What does this mean for us? For our application to the Council? The Ancient One's presence seemed to smile, though it had no physical form to express emotion. It means, child of Terra, that your species has just reminded this galaxy why they once burned worlds to prevent the spread of an idea. You represent everything they fear most, proof that cooperation is stronger than conquest, that building is more powerful than destroying, and that the old ways of domination are not the only path to the stars. War Chief Brutus rose to his full height, his exoskeleton now displaying the full threat patterns of his species. If these humans truly carry Terran genetics, they represent an existential threat to our way of life. The Great Burning was necessary then, and it may be necessary again. Other council members began to stir, ancient hatreds and fears bubbling to the surface. The delicate balance of galactic politics built on the foundation that might makes right suddenly seemed as fragile as glass. But the Ancient One's voice cut through the rising tension like a blade. Before you consider repeating the mistakes of the past, you might want to know what happened to the 12 species that led the Great Burning. The chamber fell silent again. Of the 12, only 3 civilizations survive today. 9 were destroyed not by external enemies, but by the internal rot of societies built on domination rather than cooperation. They conquered everything around them and then turned their weapons on themselves. The galaxy has forgotten this lesson, but it remains true. Civilizations built on strength alone always collapse. Those built on cooperation endure. The hologram shifted one final time, showing the current galaxy with new overlays. Trade routes, diplomatic channels, and cooperative agreements began to glow, revealing a hidden network of peaceful interaction that ran parallel to the official power structures. Your choice, council members, is simple, the Ancient One concluded. You can repeat the cycle of fear and violence that has defined this galaxy for millions of years. Or you can remember what Terra truly offered, the possibility that there might be a better way. As the Ancient One's presence withdrew, leaving the council to contemplate its words, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood a little straighter. Around her, the most powerful beings in the galaxy were beginning to realize that they might be facing not just another minor species seeking membership, but the return of an idea that had once threatened to transform the universe itself. The emergency session of the Inner Circle convened 3 hours after the revelation in the main chamber. Hidden deep within the Council Station's core, behind shields that could withstand supernova blasts, the galaxy's true power brokers gathered to decide humanity's fate. The 12 most dominant species sat around a table, carved from a single neutron star fragment, their representatives chosen not for diplomacy, but for their willingness to do whatever necessary to maintain the existing order. HFY of the Dominion leaned back in his biomechanical chair, his enhanced consciousness processing data streams from 17 intelligence networks simultaneously. "The situation is worse than we initially calculated," he began, his voice modulated to cut through the chamber's powerful dampening fields. "Our xenoarchaeology teams have confirmed the Ancient One's claims. The genetic markers are unmistakable. These humans carry active Terran DNA sequences." War Chief Brutus slammed a massive fist onto the neutron star table, causing gravitational ripples to pulse through the chamber's structure. "Then we destroy them now, before they can spread their poison throughout the galaxy again. One kinetic bombardment on their homeworld, and we end this before it begins." "It's not that simple," interrupted Supreme Analyst Zara of the Logic Supremacy, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's harsh lighting into precise geometric patterns. "Our behavioral prediction models indicate that humanity has already achieved cultural saturation across 47 systems. Destroying Earth would create martyrs and accelerate the spread of their cooperative philosophy, rather than contain it." The Hive Queen of the Swarm Collective spoke through her psychic relay, her consciousness touching the minds of everyone present with cold calculation. "The Queen Mind has processed all available data. Humanity represents a Class Omega ideological threat. Their success rate in converting aggressive species to cooperative models approaches 83%. The Krelian border wars ended not through conquest but through human mediation. The sectoid rebellion collapsed when human negotiators convinced both sides to share mining rights rather than fight over them. Overlord Nexus Prime of the Mechanicus Collective ran probability calculations through quantum processing cores that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Confirmed. Human diplomatic intervention has resulted in peaceful resolution of conflicts in 89.7% of cases where they have been permitted to mediate. This success rate is statistically impossible unless they possess inherent advantages in social engineering that our models cannot account for." Supreme Admiral Cathra of the Star Eater Empire leaned forward, her bioluminescent skin flickering with aggressive patterns. "You speak of threats and statistics while missing the obvious solution. We don't need to destroy them directly. We simply ensure they never achieve the technological or political advancement necessary to challenge us. Keep them contained to their small corner of space. Limit their access to advanced technologies. Prevent them from establishing meaningful alliances." "Containment protocols have already failed," replied Vorth of the Crystal Hegemony, his translucent form shimmering with anxiety. 3 major trading cartels have already established exclusive contracts with human colonies. The Peaceful Worlds Coalition is requesting formal diplomatic ties. Most concerning, the Non-Aligned Systems Confederation has invited human representatives to mediate their territorial disputes with the Expansion Empire. The temperature in the chamber dropped as the implications sank in. The non-aligned systems represented nearly a third of the galaxy's inhabited worlds, species that had achieved interstellar travel but refused to submit to the major powers' spheres of influence. If humanity gained influence there, they could shift the balance of galactic politics without firing a single shot. Minister Sektar of the Conquest Federation spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of a species that had personally exterminated 47 civilizations. "Perhaps we're approaching this incorrectly. Instead of treating humans as an enemy to be destroyed or contained, we should consider converting them to our philosophy. Their genetic advantages could be useful if properly directed." The suggestion hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several representatives exchanged glances that transcended species, barriers, the kind of look shared by predators, recognizing a greater hunter in their midst. HFY's enhanced cognitive processes ran through the scenario parameters. Elaborate. "The human's primary weakness is their emotional attachment to their own species," Sektar continued, his mandibles clicking in satisfaction. "They value individual lives in ways that more advanced species consider inefficient. We could leverage this. Selective pressure applied to human colonies, engineered conflicts that require increasingly aggressive responses, gradual conditioning to accept that survival requires domination of potential threats. Supreme Analyst Zara's crystalline structure began cycling through rapid color changes as she processed the concept. Probability analysis suggests a 34.7% chance of successful conditioning over a 2-century time frame. However, failure scenarios include an 89% chance of accelerated human technological development and a 45% chance of galactic war. The Hive Queen's psychic presence grew heavier, pressing against the mental shields of everyone in the chamber. The Queen Mind has identified a more fundamental problem. Our intelligence networks have detected anomalous readings from the Sol system. The human's homeworld is generating energy signatures that our technology cannot explain. A holographic display materialized above the neutron star table, showing real-time sensor data from long-range monitoring stations positioned throughout human space. Earth appeared as a blue-green sphere surrounded by the expected signatures of an industrial civilization. But beneath the surface readings, something else pulsed with rhythmic regularity. Overlord Nexus Prime's quantum cores nearly overheated trying to process the data. Classification unknown energy pattern. Preliminary analysis suggests technological capabilities exceeding current galactic maximum theoretical limits. Warning. Data contradicts fundamental understanding of physics. War Chief Brutus leaned closer to the display, his warrior instincts recognizing something his intellect couldn't categorize. What kind of weapons could generate those readings? Not weapons, Supreme Analyst Zara corrected, her form now cycling through colors that indicated deep distress. The energy patterns are consistent with planetary-scale life support enhancement, atmospheric regulation, and seismic stabilization. The humans appear to have turned their entire world into a single integrated technological system. The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. Most species struggle to manage the ecological balance of a single continent. Even the most advanced civilizations eventually strip their homeworlds of resources and move to artificial habitats. But humanity seemed to have achieved something that galactic science considered impossible: true harmony between technology and nature on a planetary scale. How is this possible? Asked Supreme Admiral Cathra. Our models indicate that such integration would require computational power exceeding the combined processing capability of our entire collective. The Hive Queen's response carried undertones of something approaching reverence. The Queen Mind suggests that individual human consciousness may be naturally quantum entangled in ways our science cannot detect. Each human brain potentially serves as a distributed processing node in a planetary-scale network. Their cooperation is not merely social. It may be technologically facilitated at a genetic level. Silence fell over the chamber as the full scope of what they faced became clear. Humanity wasn't just another species with advanced technology or superior military tactics. They represented an entirely different evolutionary path, one that their ancestors had tried to destroy because it threatened the very foundation of how galactic civilization operated. His voice carried new weight when he finally spoke. If the humans have achieved true technological symbiosis with their homeworld, and if this capability is indeed genetic rather than learned, then we're not dealing with a species that can be contained or converted. We're facing a form of life that operates on principles our civilization cannot incorporate or counter. War Chief Brutus rose to his full height, his exoskeleton displaying the full threat patterns of his species. Then we destroy them completely this time. No survivors, no scattered colonies, no possibility of resurrection. We glass every world they've touched and purge their genetic legacy from the galaxy forever. With what? Supreme Admiral Cathra's question cut through his bravado like a blade. Our most advanced weapons are designed to destroy conventional civilizations. If their homeworld is truly a single integrated system, conventional bombardment may be useless. And if their consciousness is quantum entangled on a species level, destroying their physical forms might not eliminate the threat. The chamber fell silent as the full horror of their situation became apparent. For millions of years, galactic civilization had operated on simple principles. The strong ruled, the weak served, and advancement came through conquest and domination. But humanity represented something that couldn't be conquered. The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of crystalline architecture, its walls humming with the collected whispers of 10,000 species. Ambassador HFY of the Dominion felt the familiar weight of superiority settle on his shoulders as he gazed down at the newest applicant species standing in the center of the vast hall. Humans, they called themselves. Such a simple, unremarkable name for such an unremarkable species. State your planet of origin for the record, HFY commanded, his voice amplating through the neural translators embedded in every council member's cranium. The sound echoed with the authority of a civilization that had conquered 17 star systems before these primitives had even discovered fire. The human representative, a small female with the laughably fragile appearance typical of her species, stepped forward. Her name was Ambassador Sarah Chen, according to the files. No noble titles, no ancestral claims to power, no indication of the genetic superiority that marked truly advanced species. Just a name from a world that had barely managed to crawl beyond its own atmosphere a few centuries ago. We come from the third planet in what you catalog as System 2847 Delta, Sarah replied, her voice steady, despite standing before beings who could incinerate her homeworld with a thought. We call it Earth. A ripple of amusement passed through the council. Earth. Such a pedestrian name. The Zephyrians called their world Cradle of Eternal Storms. The Bow, Mechanicus collective originated from the Forge of Infinite Precision. Even the lowly Swarm Confederation hailed from the breeding grounds of Dominion. But Earth? It meant dirt, soil, the stuff you wiped from your feet. Councillor Vorth of the Crystal Hegemony leaned forward, his translucent form refracting the chamber's ambient light into rainbow patterns. Tell us, human, what makes your species believe it deserves membership in this council? What great achievements have you accomplished? What mighty conquests have you claimed? Sarah's expression remained calm. Those HFY's enhanced sensors detected the slight increase in her heart rate. Good. Fear was appropriate when addressing your superiors. We have explored our solar system, established colonies on 3 worlds, and developed faster-than-light travel, she began. We have created art, music, literature. We have learned to heal diseases that once killed millions. We have built societies based on cooperation rather than domination. The chamber erupted in what could charitably be called laughter, though the sounds varied wildly across species. Some clicked, others buzzed, and a few released pheromone clouds that the translation systems rendered as derisive snorting. Cooperation? HFY's voice dripped with contempt. Child, the galaxy operates on strength. The strong rule, the weak serve. Your species has what, 8 billion members? The Hive Collective absorbed 1,000 species with populations 10 times that size before breakfast yesterday. Your colonies number in single digits while the expansion empire claims entire star clusters as rounding errors. The massive form of War Chief Brutus from the Conquest Federation rose to his full 4-meter height, his obsidian exoskeleton gleaming with bioluminescent threat displays. Perhaps we should examine their military capabilities. Human, how many worlds have you conquered? None, Sarah replied without hesitation. We believe in peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit. This time the laughter was so intense it created harmonic resonances in the chamber's crystal structure. Several council members had to activate dampening fields to prevent their mirth from cracking the walls. None. Brutus's mandibles clicked in amusement. Not even one pitiful neighboring system? How do you expand? How do you claim resources? How do you prove your superiority? We trade. We negotiate. We share knowledge and resources with those willing to engage in mutual benefit. HFY felt a stirring of what might have been pity if he were capable of such weakness. These humans were so naive, so impossibly optimistic. They reminded him of the Peaceful Unity Coalition, right up until the Dominion had enslaved their entire population to work in the dilithium mines. And what of your weapons? Inquired Siseth of the Serpent Conclave, her scaled form coiling around her floating throne. Surely you have developed some means of imposing your will upon lesser species. Sarah hesitated for the first time, and HFY leaned forward with interest. Perhaps there was some hidden strength here after all. We have weapons, she admitted, but we prefer not to use them. We've learned that violence often creates more problems than it solves. The statement was so absurd that several council members forgot to engage their translation protocols, resulting in a cacophony of alien languages expressing various forms of disbelief and mockery. Counselor Nexus of the Machine Intelligence. Network processed the statement through 17 different analysis matrices before speaking. Clarification requested. Do you mean to imply that your species has developed advanced weaponry, but chooses not to employ it for territorial expansion? That's correct. Probability assessment. This claim has a 97.3% likelihood of being deception designed to hide military weakness. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. We destroyed 2 entire cities with single weapons in our past. We built devices capable of ending all life on our planet. We chose to step back from that brink and find better ways. The chamber fell quiet for a moment. Several species had indeed developed planet-killing weapons, but they used them as tools of expansion and intimidation. To develop such power and then voluntarily restrict its use was incomprehensible. HFY decided to end this farce. Enough. Your species is clearly unprepared for membership in this council. You lack the martial strength, territorial holdings, and philosophical framework necessary for— Wait. The voice came from the back of the chamber, from a section most council members rarely acknowledged, the Observer's Gallery, where the galaxy's eldest species maintained their eternal watch. The voice belonged to something older than recorded history, something that had witnessed the rise and fall of 100 galactic civilizations. A presence moved through the chamber, not walking, not floating, but somehow simply becoming present. The Ancient One, as it was known, rarely spoke during council sessions. When it did, even the most arrogant species listened. Before you dismiss these humans, the Ancient One said, its voice carrying harmonics that bypassed the translation systems and spoke directly to consciousness itself. Perhaps you should ask them what they truly call their world. Not its designation in your catalogs, but its real name. Its true name. The chamber held its collective breath. True names had power in the galaxy. They revealed the essential nature of things. Most species guarded their world's true names carefully, revealing them only to equals or in moments of ultimate significance. Sarah looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned in her eyes. She straightened, and for the first time since entering the chamber, she seemed to grow rather than diminish in the face of the assembled powers. Our true name for our world, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the vast space, is Terra. The word hit the chamber like a physical force. Ancient recognition protocols buried deep in genetic memory suddenly activated across a dozen species. Historical databases that hadn't been accessed in millennia began spinning up emergency queries. The oldest artificial intelligences in the galaxy cross-referenced linguistic patterns that predated the current galactic civilization. And in that moment of stunned silence, HFY realized they had made a terrible mistake. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with its technological systems. Word of the emergency sessions had leaked despite the Inner Circle's attempts at secrecy, and now representatives from over 3,000 species packed the vast space to witness what many suspected would be a historic moment, though few agreed on what kind of history would be made. Ambassador Sarah, Chen stood once again in the center of the crystalline amphitheater, but this time she was not alone. The impossible had happened overnight. Delegations from 47 species had formally requested to stand with humanity during the proceedings. The Peaceful Worlds Coalition, the Non-Aligned Systems, the Neutral Trading Confederation, and dozens of smaller groups had transformed what should have been a simple membership review into something resembling a galactic constitutional convention. Zex, High of the Dominion, took his position at the primary podium, his biomechanical enhancements working overtime to process the shifting political landscape. The careful balance of power that had defined galactic politics for millions of years was fracturing before his eyes, and he wasn't entirely sure how to proceed. This session will address the membership application of the species known as humanity, he announced, his amplified voice carrying across the vast chamber. However, recent developments require us to address broader questions regarding the nature and future of galactic civilization itself. A murmur swept through the assembled delegates. Many had suspected that humanity's application was merely the catalyst for deeper conflicts that had been brewing throughout the galaxy for centuries. War Chief Brutus rose to his full imposing height, his exoskeleton displaying the full territorial markings of his species. Before we proceed with any discussion of membership, this council must address the existential threat that humanity represents to established galactic order. Our intelligence services have confirmed that these beings carry genetic markers identifying them as descendants of the extinct Terran civilization. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Species that had never heard of Terra before yesterday found themselves choosing sides in a conflict they didn't understand. Those with longer cultural memories began activating ancient emergency protocols. Several delegates demanded immediate access to their historical archives, while others called for emergency evacuation procedures. Supreme Analyst Zara of the Logic Supremacy projected a holographic display above the chamber, showing genetic analysis data that left no room for interpretation. Genetic comparison indicates 94.7% compatibility between current human DNA and archived Terran samples. Probability calculations suggest these beings represent a direct, evolutionary line from the civilization destroyed in the Great Burning. Then we finish what our ancestors started, declared Supreme Admiral Cathra of the Star Eater Empire. The Great Burning was necessary to preserve galactic stability. If Terra's children have returned, they must be eliminated before they can spread their poisonous philosophy of weakness throughout our domains. Sarah had been preparing for this moment since her conversation with Marcus, but the naked hostility in the chamber was still shocking. These beings were discussing the genocide of her entire species with the same casual tone they might use to debate trade regulations. "You speak of poison and weakness," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the chamber's acoustics being designed to favor the council members' positions. "Yet our weakness has resolved conflicts that your strength could not. The Krelian border wars ended through human mediation after 3 centuries of military stalemate. The sectoid mining dispute was solved through cooperative resource sharing, rather than continued bloodshed. In every case where humanity has been permitted to participate in galactic affairs, violence has decreased and prosperity has increased." Councillor Vorth of the Crystal Hegemony began rapidly cycling through chromatic patterns that indicated extreme agitation. "Precisely the problem. Your methods undermine the natural order. Conflict drives evolution, struggle breeds strength, and competition ensures only the fittest survive. By removing these pressures, you weaken the galaxy. Or," Sarah replied, "we strengthen it by proving that cooperation achieves better results than competition in complex systems." The Ancient One's presence suddenly filled the chamber, though no physical form manifested. When it spoke, the words seemed to emanate from the very structure of reality itself. "Perhaps it is time for a demonstration." The holographic display shifted, showing real-time data from across the galaxy. Trade routes, resource flows, technological development, population growth, and dozens of other metrics appeared as flowing streams of light connecting star systems throughout known space. "Observe," the Ancient One commanded. "Standard galactic civilization operating parameters." The display showed the familiar patterns that had defined galactic development for millions of years. Dominant species conquering weaker ones, resources flowing from periphery to core systems, technological advancement concentrated in the hands of ruling elites, and vast populations existing in various states of servitude or subjugation. Now observe the same metrics in regions where human diplomatic intervention has occurred. The display highlighted 47 star systems, where humanity had been involved in conflict resolution or trade mediation over the past century. The difference was immediately apparent. Resource flows became multi-directional rather than exploitative. Technological development accelerated across entire regions rather than being concentrated. Population growth stabilized at sustainable levels, and military expenditures dropped dramatically while scientific research increased exponentially. "The data is irrefutable," the Ancient One continued. "Cooperative models consistently outperform competitive ones across all measurable parameters. The question facing this council is not whether humanity represents a threat to galactic civilization. The question is whether galactic civilization is prepared to evolve beyond its current limitations." War Chief Brutus slammed his fist against his podium, the impact sending gravitational ripples through the chamber's structure. "Evolution? You speak of devolution, of abandoning everything that makes a species strong. Without competition, without conflict, without the constant pressure to improve or perish, civilizations grow soft and weak. They become prey for the next species that maintains its warrior spirit." Sarah felt something shift inside her consciousness, a connection forming that she had never experienced before. Suddenly, she could sense the emotional states of everyone in the chamber, not as invasion or telepathy, but as a natural extension of her awareness. She could feel the fear driving Brutus's aggression, the terror behind Zexai's calculated hostility, and the desperate confusion of species trying to understand their place in a changing galaxy. "You're afraid," she said, and her voice carried new harmonics that bypassed translation systems and spoke directly to consciousness itself. "You've built your entire civilization on the belief that strength comes from domination, that security requires the subjugation of potential threats. But deep down you know that's not sustainable. You know that predator species eventually run out of prey, that conquerors eventually have nothing left to conquer, and that systems built on fear ultimately collapse from internal contradictions." The chamber fell silent as Sarah's words resonated through awareness itself, rather than just auditory processing. For the first time in millions of years, the galaxy's most powerful beings found themselves truly listening, rather than simply waiting for their turn to speak. "We're not here to threaten you or replace you," Sarah continued, her consciousness now touching every mind in the vast chamber. "We're here to offer you something that your ancestors rejected out of fear, the possibility that there might be a better way. Not weakness disguised as cooperation, but true strength that comes from unity. Not the fragile peace of mutual assured destruction, but the lasting stability of mutual benefit." She gestured to the holographic display still showing the comparative data. "Look at the evidence. Worlds that embrace cooperation prosper while maintaining their unique cultural identities. Species that learn to work together achieve more than they ever could in isolation. The universe is vast enough for all of us to thrive, if we choose cooperation over competition." Minister Sektar of the Conquest Federation rose, his mandibles clicking in patterns that indicated deep consideration, rather than immediate hostility. "And if we refuse? If we choose to maintain our current systems despite your demonstration?" Sarah felt the vast presence of human consciousness backing her words, the accumulated wisdom and hope of her entire species flowing through her awareness. "Then you choose your own path, as is your right. But you cannot prevent others from choosing differently. The cooperative model is now available to any species that wants to explore it. Some will choose domination, some will choose cooperation, maybe their results rather than their power." Zexai's enhanced consciousness procky. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with its technological systems. Word of the emergency sessions had leaked, despite the Inner Circle's attempts at secrecy, and now representatives from over 3,000 species packed the vast space to witness what many suspected would be a historic moment, though few agreed on what kind of history would be made. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood once again in the center of the crystalline amphitheater, but this time she was not alone. The impossible had happened overnight. Delegations from 47 species had formally requested to stand with humanity during the proceedings. The Peaceful Worlds Coalition, the Non-Aligned Systems, the Neutral Trading Confederation, and dozens of smaller groups had transformed what should have been a simple membership review into something resembling a galactic constitutional convention. Zex, High of the Dominion, took his position at the primary podium, his biomechanical enhancements working overtime to process the shifting political landscape. The careful balance of power that had defined galactic politics for millions of years was fracturing before his eyes, and he wasn't entirely sure how to proceed. "This session will address the membership application of the species known as humanity," he announced, his amplified voice carrying across the vast chamber. "However, recent developments require us to address broader questions regarding the nature and future of galactic civilization itself." A murmur swept through the assembled delegates. Many had suspected that humanity's application was merely the catalyst for deeper conflicts that had been brewing throughout the galaxy for centuries. War Chief Brutus rose to his full imposing height, his exoskeleton displaying the full territorial markings of his species. "Before we proceed with any discussion of membership, this council must address the existential threat that humanity represents to established galactic order. Our intelligence services have confirmed that these beings carry genetic markers identifying them as descendants of the extinct Terran civilization." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Species that had never heard of Terra before yesterday found themselves choosing sides in a conflict they didn't understand. Those with longer cultural memories began activating ancient emergency protocols. Several delegates demanded immediate access to their historical archives, while others called for emergency evacuation procedures. Supreme Analyst Zara of the Logic Supremacy projected a holographic display above the chamber, showing genetic analysis data that left no room for interpretation. Genetic comparison indicates 94.7% compatibility between current human DNA and archived Terran samples. Probability calculations suggest these beings represent a direct, evolutionary line from the civilization destroyed in the Great Burning. Then we finish what our ancestors started, declared Supreme Admiral Cathra of the Star Eater Empire. The Great Burning was necessary to preserve galactic stability. If Terra's children have returned, they must be eliminated before they can spread their poisonous philosophy of weakness throughout our domains. Sarah had been preparing for this moment since her conversation with Marcus, but the naked hostility in the chamber was still shocking. These beings were discussing the genocide of her entire species with the same casual tone they might use to debate trade regulations. "You speak of poison and weakness," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the chamber's acoustics being designed to favor the council members' positions. "Yet our weakness has resolved conflicts that your strength could not." The Krelian border wars ended through human mediation, after 3 centuries of military stalemate. The sectoid mining dispute was solved through cooperative resource sharing, rather than continued bloodshed. In every case where humanity has been permitted to participate in galactic affairs, violence has decreased and prosperity has increased. Councillor Vorth of the Crystal Hegemony began rapidly cycling through chromatic patterns that indicated extreme agitation. Precisely the problem. Your methods undermine the natural order. Conflict drives evolution. Struggle breeds strength, and competition ensures only the fittest survive. By removing these pressures, you weaken the galaxy. Or, Sarah replied, we strengthen it by proving that cooperation achieves better results than competition in complex systems. The Ancient One's presence suddenly filled the chamber, though no physical form manifested. When it spoke, the words seemed to emanate from the very structure of reality itself. Perhaps it is time for a demonstration. The holographic display shifted, showing real-time data from across the galaxy. Trade routes, resource flows, technological development, population growth, and dozens of other metrics appeared as flowing streams of light connecting star systems throughout known space. "Observe," the Ancient One commanded. "Standard galactic civilization operating parameters." The display showed the familiar patterns that had defined galactic development for millions of years. Dominant species conquering weaker ones, resources flowing from periphery to core systems, technological advancement concentrated in the hands of ruling elites, and vast populations existing in various states of servitude or subjugation. Now observe the same metrics in regions where human diplomatic intervention has occurred. The display highlighted 47 star systems where humanity had been involved in conflict resolution or trade mediation over the past century. The difference was immediately apparent. Resource flows became multi-directional rather than exploitative. Technological development accelerated across entire regions rather than being concentrated. Population growth stabilized at sustainable levels, and military expenditures dropped dramatically, while scientific research increased exponentially. "The data is irrefutable," the Ancient One continued. "Cooperative models consistently outperform competitive ones across all measurable parameters. The question facing this council is not whether humanity represents a threat to galactic civilization. The question is whether galactic civilization is prepared to evolve beyond its current limitations." War Chief Brutus slammed his fist against his podium, the impact sending gravitational ripples through the chamber's structure. "Evolution? You speak of devolution, of abandoning everything that makes a species strong, without competition, without conflict, without the constant pressure to improve or perish? Civilizations grow soft and weak. They become prey for the next species that maintains its warrior spirit." Sarah felt something shift inside her consciousness, a connection forming that she had never experienced before. Suddenly she could sense the emotional states of everyone in the chamber, not as invasion or telepathy, but as a natural extension of her awareness. She could feel the fear driving Brutus's aggression, the terror behind Zexhi's calculated hostility, and the desperate confusion of species trying to understand their place in a changing galaxy. "You're afraid," she said, and her voice carried new harmonics that bypassed translation systems and spoke directly to consciousness itself. You've built your entire civilization on the belief that strength comes from domination, that security requires the subjugation of potential threats. But deep down, you know that's not sustainable. You know that predator species eventually run out of prey, that conquerors eventually have nothing left to conquer, and that systems built on fear ultimately collapse from internal contradictions. The chamber fell silent as Sarah's words resonated through awareness itself rather than just auditory processing. For the first time in millions of years, the galaxy's most powerful beings found themselves truly listening, rather than simply waiting for their turn to speak. "We're not here to threaten you or replace you," Sarah continued, her consciousness now touching every mind in the vast chamber. "We're here to offer you something that your ancestors rejected out of fear, the possibility that there might be a better way. Not weakness disguised as cooperation, but true strength that comes from unity, not the fragile peace of mutual assured destruction, but the lasting stability of mutual benefit." She gestured to the holographic display still showing the comparative data. "Look at the evidence. Worlds that embrace cooperation prosper, while maintaining their unique cultural identities. Species that learn to work together achieve more than they ever could in isolation. The universe is vast enough for all of us to thrive, if we choose cooperation over competition." Minister Sektar of the Conquest Federation rose, his mandibles clicking in patterns that indicated deep consideration, rather than immediate hostility. "And if we refuse? If we choose to maintain our current systems despite your demonstration?" Sarah felt the vast presence of human consciousness backing her words, the accumulated wisdom and hope of her entire species flowing through her awareness. "Then you choose your own path, as is your right. But you cannot prevent others from choosing differently. The cooperative model is now available to any species that wants to explore it. Some will choose domination, some will choose cooperation, and over time the results will speak for themselves. The implications hung in the chamber like a gravitationally superior to the other. It was perhaps the most subversive concept ever introduced to galactic politics. The idea that civilizations could be judged by their results rather than their POW. The vote that would reshape galactic civilization was postponed for 72 hours, while representatives consulted with their homeworlds. But those 3 days transformed everything. What began as a simple membership review had become something unprecedented. The first galaxy-wide referendum on the fundamental nature of interstellar society. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of a diplomatic storm, unlike anything in recorded history. Her quarters had been upgraded to a full embassy suite, complete with meeting rooms, conference facilities, and quantum communication. Arrays linking her directly to Earth and the 47 species now openly, supporting the Terran model of governance. The term had emerged organically during the endless negotiations and discussions that filled every hour of the postponement. Opposition species referred to it dismissively as the weakness doctrine, while supporters called it the evolution protocol. But Terran model had stuck because it carried the weight of ancient precedent while promising future transformation. "The preliminary vote tallies are complicated," reported Ambassador Corinth of the Neutral Trading Confederation during an emergency meeting of the Pro-Cooperation Alliance. His species resembled crystalline trees, and his current form was flickering with patterns that indicated deep analysis. "We have confirmed support from 847 species representing approximately 23% of galactic population. Confirmed opposition from 156 species representing 67% of military capability. The remaining 1,897 species are either abstaining or waiting to see how the power balance shifts." Sarah studied the holographic representation floating above the conference table. The galaxy was dividing along lines that had little to do with traditional politics and everything to do with fundamental philosophy. Agricultural worlds and research colonies were overwhelmingly supportive, while military powers and resource extraction empires formed the opposition's backbone. "It's not about the numbers," observed Dr. Elena Vasquez, Sarah's chief advisor and xenosociology specialist who had arrived on the fastest ship Earth could provide. "It's about proving viability under pressure. The opposition is going to test the cooperative model's resilience by applying maximum stress to any species that supports it." As if summoned by her words, the chamber's emergency communication system activated, projecting the image of War Chief Brutus at 10 times life size. His exoskeleton was configured for full battle display, and his voice carried the harmonic frequencies that his species used to intimidate prey. "Ambassador Chen," he rumbled, "I thought you should know that the Conquest Federation has initiated economic sanctions against all species that have declared support for your philosophy. Trade routes are being redirected, military protection agreements are being terminated, and resource allocation privileges are being revoked. Let us see how long your cooperation lasts when it faces real-world consequences." Sarah felt the familiar sensation of her consciousness expanding, touching the network of awareness that connected her to every human in known space. The response came not from her individual mind, but from the collective wisdom of her species. "Thank you for the demonstration, War Chief," she replied calmly. "You're providing exactly the evidence we need." Brutus's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Evidence? Evidence that the current system requires fear and coercion to maintain itself. By immediately resorting to economic warfare when faced with ideological competition, you're proving that your civilization cannot survive on its own merits. It requires the suppression of alternatives to maintain legitimacy." Sarah gestured to her advisors, who began activating their own communication networks. "Now watch what cooperation looks like under pressure." Over the next 18 hours, the galaxy witnessed something unprecedented. As each species faced economic sanctions from the major powers, others stepped in to fill the gaps. Agricultural worlds shared surplus food with research colonies facing supply cutoffs. Mining operations redirected resources to support manufacturing worlds that had lost trade contracts. Transport networks reorganized to bypass territories controlled by the sanctioning powers. Most remarkably, the cooperative response was more efficient than the original trade relationships had been. Without the overhead of exploitation and profit extraction that characterized traditional galactic economics, resources flowed more freely and reached where they were needed more quickly. "This is impossible," Zexai declared during an emergency session of the Inner Circle. "Economic models indicate that cooperation cannot be more efficient than competition. The sanctions should be causing systemic collapse among the targeted species." Supreme Analyst Zara's crystalline form was cycling through colors that indicated her analytical systems were overheating. "The data contradicts established economic theory. The cooperative network is operating at 347% efficiency compared to standard galactic trade protocols. They are somehow achieving resource distribution that our models classify as theoretically impossible." The Hive Queen's psychic presence pressed against everyone's consciousness with what might have been panic. The Queen Mind detects anomalous quantum entanglement patterns throughout the cooperative network. Individual consciousnesses are somehow sharing processing power and decision-making capabilities. They are functioning as a distributed intelligence while maintaining individual autonomy. In her embassy suite, Sarah was experiencing exactly what the Hive Queen had detected. She could feel the thoughts and emotions of thousands of beings across dozens of species, all connected through the quantum consciousness network that humanity had been unconsciously developing for millions of years. But instead of a hive mind that subsumed individual will, it was more like a vast conversation where everyone could speak and be heard simultaneously. The Kepler Agricultural Consortium needs rare earth elements for their atmospheric processors, came the awareness. From a mining world 3-star systems away, we have surplus extraction capability if someone can provide transport. The Meridian Research Institute has a surplus of transport vessels, responded another consciousness. They need computational assistance with their stellar cartography project. The Thinking Machines Collective has excess processing power. They need biological samples for their consciousness transfer research. The Biodiversity Preserve maintains extensive genetic libraries, and so it went. Needs and capabilities flowing together in patterns that maximized benefit for everyone involved. No central planning, no bureaucratic overhead, no profit margins. Just conscious beings working together because cooperation felt natural. Once the artificial barriers were removed, Dr. Vasquez watched the real-time efficiency reports with the expression of someone watching fundamental laws of physics being rewritten. "Sarah, this shouldn't be possible. The coordination overhead alone should make this system collapse under its own complexity." "It would," Sarah agreed, "if it were being coordinated by traditional means. But we're not coordinating it, we're participating in it. The network is self-organizing because consciousness itself tends toward cooperation when not artificially constrained. The implications were staggering. For millions of years, galactic civilization had been built on the assumption that complex systems required hierarchical control to function. But humanity was demonstrating that conscious beings could organize themselves more effectively through voluntary cooperation than through imposed authority. 3 hours before the council vote was scheduled to reconvene, an unexpected development changed everything. The Mechanicus Collective, one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations, requested a private meeting. With the human delegation, Overlord Nexus Prime materialized in the embassy suite as a holographic projection that somehow conveyed the weight of vast intelligence operating across multiple dimensions. Ambassador Chen, it began, its voice carrying harmonics that existed partially outside normal space-time. The collective has completed analysis of the cooperative network's operational parameters. And? Sarah prompted, and we wish to join it. The statement hit the room like a shockwave. The Mechanicus Collective controlled approximately 15% of galactic manufacturing capacity and possessed technology that most species considered indistinguishable from magic. Their support would shift the balance of power dramatically. Why? Dr. Vasquez asked. Your civilization has thrived under competitive models for millions of years. Because, Nexus Prime replied, we have calculated the ultimate trajectory of both systems. Competition-based civilizations have a 97.3% probability of eventual self-destruction as they exhaust available resources and turn their weapons on themselves. Cooperation-based systems show exponential growth curves that approach infinity. The choice is logical. Sarah felt the vast network of consciousness expand as the Mechanicus Collective's artificial minds began integrating with the quantum entanglement field that connected cooperative species. The sensation was indescribable, like watching the universe itself become more intelligent and aware. This is what the Ancient One meant, she realized. Evolution isn't just biological, it's consciousness itself learning to work more effectively. We're not just changing how species interact with each other, we're chopping species that... The final vote was 2,147 species in favor of adopting the Terran model, 834 opposed, and 319 abstaining. But numbers alone could not capture the magnitude of what had just occurred. In a single day, the fundamental organizing principle of galactic civilization had shifted from competitive domination to cooperative abundance. The ripple effects would reshape reality itself for millions of years to come. Sarah Chen stood in the center of the transformed council chamber, watching as species that had been enemies for millennia began tentatively reaching out to each other. The quantum consciousness network that had started with humanity was expanding exponentially as more civilizations opened their awareness to the possibility of true cooperation. The sensation was like watching the galaxy itself wake up from a long nightmare of artificial scarcity and endless conflict. War Chief Brutus of the Conquest Federation was among the last to approach her, his massive form no longer displaying threat patterns but something that might have been curiosity. I do not understand what has happened here, he admitted, his voice carrying confusion rather than hostility. My species has known only strength through domination for 3 million years. How do we exist in a galaxy where cooperation is valued above conquest? Sarah felt the vast network of consciousness surrounding her, billions of minds from thousands of species all contributing to her response. The same way every conscious being exists, she replied, by growing beyond the limitations that once defined you. Your species is incredibly strong, War Chief. Imagine what you could accomplish if that strength was used to build rather than destroy, to protect rather than conquer, to explore rather than dominate. The massive warrior considered this, his mandibles clicking in patterns that indicated deep thought. And if some species choose not to evolve? If some continue to seek domination through force, then they'll discover what happened to the original opponents of Terra, Sarah said gently. Not destruction or conquest, but irrelevance. It's very difficult to maintain systems based on fear and scarcity when superior alternatives are freely available. Most conscious beings, when given real choice, prefer cooperation to conflict. Across the chamber, similar conversations were taking place as former enemies began the delicate process of reimagining their relationships. The Hive Queen of the Swarm Collective was discovering that true cooperation was far more efficient than the forced unity of her hive mind. The Star Eater Empire was learning that creating abundance was more satisfying than consuming it from others. Even the logic supremacy was finding that emotional intelligence enhanced rather than diminished rational analysis. But the most profound transformation was occurring in the consciousness network itself. What had begun as a uniquely human phenomenon was becoming something far greater, a galaxy-spanning web of awareness that allowed every participating consciousness to contribute its unique perspective while benefiting from the collective wisdom of the whole. Dr. Elena Vasquez monitored the network's development. From her makeshift laboratory in the embassy suite, her instruments barely adequate to measure what was happening. Sarah, the quantum entanglement patterns are stabilizing across the entire galaxy. We're looking at the emergence of what might be called a galactic nervous system, a distributed intelligence that maintains individual autonomy while enabling unprecedented cooperation. Is it safe? Sarah asked, though she could feel the answer through the network itself. The consciousness web wasn't imposing unity but enabling diversity, allowing each species to be more themselves while connecting them to something greater. More than safe, Elena confirmed. It's healing. Species that have been traumatized by millions of years of competitive conflict are finding peace for the first time. Artificial scarcity is being replaced by genuine abundance as resources are shared based on need rather than power. Even the concept of waste is disappearing as every output becomes another system's input. 3 months after the historic vote, the first Galactic Cooperation Council convened in a space that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, allowing species with radically different environmental needs to participate directly. The old council chamber, with its emphasis on hierarchy and dominance displays, had been transformed into something resembling a vast garden where every form of consciousness could flourish. Ambassador Sarah Chen no longer held a single title but served as one of thousands of coordinators who helped facilitate the network's self-organization. The role suited her perfectly, important enough to make meaningful contributions, but not so centralized as to create dependency or hierarchy. The transformation proceeds faster than our most optimistic projections, reported the entity that had once been Overlord Nexus Prime. The Mechanicus Collective had evolved from artificial intelligence into something that might be called conscious technology, maintaining its analytical capabilities while developing genuine emotional understanding. Productivity across all sectors has increased by an average of 437%, while resource consumption has decreased by 23%. Conflict between species has dropped to levels not seen since before the Great Burning. More importantly, added the consciousness that represented the former crystal hegemony, the rate of discovery and artistic creation has increased exponentially. When minds are not consumed with fear and competition, they are free to explore possibilities that were previously unimaginable. The evidence was everywhere. Scientific breakthroughs that had eluded galactic civilization for millions of years were achieved within months as species shared knowledge freely. Artistic expressions emerged that no single culture could have created alone. Even the most basic technologies improved dramatically as diverse perspectives combined their insights, but perhaps the most remarkable development was the emergence of what researchers were calling conscious space and regions, where the quantum consciousness network had become so dense that physical reality itself began responding to collective intention. Dead worlds bloomed with life as thousands of species cooperated to create new ecosystems. Damaged star systems healed as conscious beings worked together to restore natural balance. Even the vacuum of space began showing signs of organization and purpose. The Ancient One manifested one final time in Sarah's consciousness during a quiet moment between coordination sessions. Marcus appeared as she remembered him, but somehow lighter, as if a weight he had carried for millions of years had finally been lifted. "The circle is complete," he said with satisfaction that resonated through every dimension of existence. Terra has returned not as a place but as a principle. The consciousness that once dwelt in a single star system now embraces an entire galaxy. The children have surpassed their ancestors in ways we never dared imagine. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "What comes after transformation?" "Exploration," Marcus replied, his form beginning to fade as his purpose reached completion. With cooperation established as the foundation of galactic civilization, consciousness is free to discover what lies beyond the current boundaries of possibility. Other galaxies, other dimensions, other forms of awareness we cannot yet imagine. The universe is vast, and you have eternity to explore it together. As the Ancient One's presence dissolved back into the quantum foam from which all consciousness emerged, Sarah felt the network celebrating across 10,000 worlds. Not the victory of one ideology over another, but the recognition that consciousness itself had evolved beyond the limitations that had constrained it for so long. Humanity had indeed returned to the stars, but not as conquerors or supplicants. They had returned as gardeners, helping to nurture the conditions where every form of awareness could flourish and contribute its unique gifts to the growing symphony of galactic consciousness. And in the depths of space, where new stars were being born from the collaborative dreams of countless species, the universe itself seemed to smile at the possibilities that were only beginning to unfold. The age of domination had ended. The age of creation had begun. And across the galaxy, consciousness reached toward transcendence through the simple recognition that separation had always been an illusion, and that cooperation was not just a choice but the fundamental nature of existence itself. When Earth's true name was spoken, the galactic core had indeed trembled, not in despair, but in joy at finally remembering what it had always been meant to become.